Yeah, well, I mean, I think the thing is when you get older, the thing that stick with you are the people, you know. So like when I'm talking about Mike and GI Joe, like sure, I remember the stories, but really I remember being there with Mike and Josh and Tim and you know and everyone else at Devils Due. I mean, that's really what made it special, you know. And the same was true at Marvel. You know, I remember all these moments with people that I worked with, and that's what sticks with me. The details of the story, hopefully what we did on those various books were enjoyable enough that, people who bought them, will remember them in the same way I remember comics when I was a kid, and they meant a lot to me. But for me as a professional, the stuff that really sticks with me always is the experiences with the people,
Live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe comics podcast. Now, today we are continuing our look at the Devils Due era of G.I. Joe comics with a talk with writer, editor, Mark Powers. What a great guest. But I will not be doing that alone. I'll be joined, as always, by my co-host. It's a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and listeners and viewers. Let's bring in our guest.
Let's do it right now. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
So good of you to join us. Now, I have prepared an extra exclusive introduction video for you. I've gone all out on this one. Hope you enjoy it. Talking Joe and the Devils Due universe. I am Mark, host of Talking Joe and defender of the secrets of G.I. Joe. And this is Tim, my real American friend. Amazing behind-the-scenes secrets were revealed to me the day I held aloft my microphone and said, "By the powers of Devils Due, I have Mark Powers."
Very nice.
Not everyone gets that treatment.
He's got to be that tiger character.
I accept all of Mark's light jabs.
Okay, so here is my blurb from my research. Correct me as I go on. So Mark Powers graduated from Rutgers University in New Jersey with a degree in art in 1990, joining Marvel Comics as an intern in 1991, where he stayed for 11 years and rose through the ranks to senior editor. Work at Marvel included editing New X-Men with Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely, and Ultimate X-Men with Mark Millar and Adam Kubert. He also had work as a penciler, including in Marvel Comics Presents issues 119 and 120, alongside Sam Keith, the same caliber. Yeah, that's amazing.
I wish.
In 2002, he left Marvel and moved to Chicago to work as an editor at Devils Due Publishing, editing G.I. Joe titles from issue 31 through to G.I. Joe America's Elite 4 and other titles such as Snake Eyes Declassified. After a little break, he returned in 2007 as a writer for the fan-favorite World War III storyline in America's Elite issues 21 through to the final issue 36. And alongside that, also on Drafted for Devils Due. And since then, he has worked on various projects, including freelancing from his own company, Mega Powers Entertainment, such as on comic book adaptations of the Dresden Files novels for Dynamite Entertainment. How's that, Mark?
That's good. Yeah, I mean, just slightly off with some of the dates, but it's close. It's all important stuff.
Ballpark.
Podcast over. Mark, where are you coming to Where are you geographically today?
I live in Island Park, New York, which is on Long Island. I don't know if you guys familiar with the area. If you know anything about Long Island, what I'm close to is a city called Long Beach. It's a big sort of beach community, and we're the next town over.
Okay, so Long Island is this horizontal on many maps, this horizontal stretch.
Yeah.
And where from east to west, sort of where are you? Are you in the middle?
We're more in the middle because we're not too far outside. There's Queens and then Nassau. We're kind of just inside Nassau. We're fairly close to Queens.
Okay. So hop on a train. You're in the city. You're in Manhattan in an hour.
Yeah. I go into the city a few days a week, so it's roughly an hour on the train.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not too far.
Cool.
So let's explore, before we get deep into the Devils Due era, let's explore a bit of background and how you got there. So I think you were born late 60s, so about 10 years ahead of me. Did you, when you first encountered G.I. Joe, I guess that was the big guy rather than the
of course
little guys.
I mean, as I would joke around with Mike and Sam and the other guys at Devils Due, to me, G.I. Joe was 12 inches tall and he had kung fu grip and flocked hair and those are the toys I had when I was a kid for G.I. Joe, and I just kind of missed the the Larry version of the cartoons and Cobra and G.I. Joe. I was never not into toys. Even in the early 80s when I was ostensibly too old for toys, I still had all my Star Wars stuff. Actually, it's just sitting over here on the floor. I kept all that stuff because I was a collector. I collected comics and I still loved all that stuff, but I just kind of missed that wave of G.I. Joe. And, when it's funny, when I worked at Marvel, all the assistants who were just a few years younger than me were all huge G.I. Joe fans, in fact, my assistant, Pete Franco, was a huge G.I. Joe fan. I remember when the first Devils Due issue came out, they all went to, Jim Hanley's universe at lunchtime, and they got issue 1. They came back, and my Pete was so excited. He's like, dude, look at this new G.I. Joe, and he's got who did the cover?
J. Scott Campbell.
Who did the cover? And they were all so excited. I'm just like, wait a minute, who is this? Josh Blaylock? Just some guy got the G.I. Joe? How did this happen? Of course, little did I imagine I would actually end up working there. But yeah, I was definitely action team, adventure team. That was my G.I. Joe.
And the 1980s relaunch was kind of, I guess, just on the periphery, that it's a cultural phenomenon, but you weren't.
I was definitely aware of the comic and how popular it was, but it just wasn't something that I happened to read.
Mark, did you have a comic book store near you as a kid? Did you go to a newsstand?
Yeah, I went to a newsstand.
Okay.
I don't think I went. I think the first time I was actually at a comic store was probably, maybe early in high school. And then when I was, then when I got my driver's license, I was aware of a store that was maybe half an hour away from us, and I would go to that. But all through my childhood, I would go to the local convenience store or drugstore, and that's where I got my comics. I can still remember, going down, riding my bike, I'd get a comic in the Snickers bar or something. And I remember one week where Captain America 263 and X-Men 150 came out in the same day. And I saw at the end of one was the Red Skull, at the end of the other was Magneto. And I was like, I gotta have both of these, but I didn't have enough. So I had to ride my bike back and search through my junk drawer looking for change, So yeah, that's where I used to get my comics.
What were the comics that you had to read or that you were most looking forward to?
When I was a kid, definitely X-Men and Captain America were my two favorites. Captain America really, I'm not really sure. Captain America was really the first comic I collected where I realized, okay, I see there's an issue number here, and that this is going to come out next month, and this issue is 245, and next month will be 246, and it's just going to continue, And I can't really say why it sort of caught on with that particular book at that particular time, but it did, and that's really what started me collecting. Hardcore. I'd always been into comics, even when I was really small. I remember, my aunt or whoever, other family members would get me, they knew I loved superheroes. So they would get me like, oh, here's, these, well, I'm sure you guys have seen them, the old reprints of like the DC superheroes where everyone's origin is in one book. And so I'd get that stuff. But I, as far as collecting myself, it wasn't until I sort of caught on a particular issue of Captain America. And then I started, I became a total Marvel zombie, it was like really into, I totally fell right into the, like, they really made an effort to cultivate, like, you're going to read Marvel books, Marvel books are cool. And it was the perfect age to fall into that. It was, when I started collecting, I was probably 7th grade, something like that. So it was just in early adolescence, and so especially with the X-Men, it was just like perfect timing, and I got super into it. Probably my, the one I was the most into it was like the Chris Claremont, Paul Smith X-Men, and the J.M. DeMatteis, Mike Zeck Captain America. Those are my 2 favorite books from childhood.
Do you have that? You have that new IDW X-Men Paul Smith artist edition?
I don't. I can't afford that stuff. It's too. I have 2 daughters, and one of them is in college, and then as soon as she's done, the next one starts. So we have to watch our money very carefully. But when they're graduated, then I will get all those because those are like, I know if I buy one, I'll just start buying all of them.
It's a slippery slope. So you went to university to study art. Was the thinking there that you might pursue art and specifically comics art as a career?
I always wanted to do. I always wanted to work in comics, specifically as an artist. I majored in art. I wanted to go to art school. My parents kind of like talked me out of that. So I went to Rutgers, where it's really a liberal arts school, but I majored in art, and I actually I had an internship. My last couple years there, I was an intern at Marvel in between junior and senior year, and then I forget if maybe it was the spring semester of my senior year. I forget, but I had 2 internships there while I was at Rutgers, because that really always was what I wanted to do. And for a while when I was at Marvel, I kind of had it in the back of my head that someday I'm going to, maybe after 5 years or whatever, I'll work on my stuff on the side, and eventually I'll go freelance. That was something that people did a lot during those times, and I just really, honestly, I wasn't good enough. And I wasn't into it enough as far as like sitting down and doing the work to, I think if I had really busted my butt every day and worked on it the way you need to, I could have been a solid, okay, mediocre. And I don't mean that in a bad way, because to be a mediocre comic artist, you have to be able to draw anything, but I was never going to be like, Jim Lee or John Byrne. And I just didn't have the drive for that, but I had become very, I really liked the process and the editorial process of putting together teams. That was something that, I got exposed to as an intern. I really thought like, this is really cool. It's really, figuring out which writer would work best with which artist, with which inker, and trying to position books in different ways, that I found really appealing. And then obviously once I was there actually doing it, that really becomes your whole life, so gradually, the art thing, it never fell by the wayside until really I had gone here, there, and everywhere. I always kind of kept it as like, maybe I'll try this. As a matter of fact, when I first started working on G.I. Joe, that was kind of how it happened in a way, is that, I had worked in a New York City public school for a year because that was something I thought maybe I want to do this. Maybe I want to be a teacher. It was after Devils Due, and I really needed something else. And you want to do something that doesn't feel like just a job. I thought maybe teaching could be that. So I worked there for a year, and I enjoyed it, but it was enough to tell me like, I can't do this. It's like, it takes more than loving kids to be a good teacher, and I didn't have it. So, but what I came out of that is I did have a summer off, and I was still going to get paid, so I said, all right, I'm going to try to, once and for all, sit down and try to see if I can get some work drawing stuff. So my only real connections that I was in close contact with at that point was Mike and other people at Devils Due. Mike had sort of taken over when I left, and I just tortured myself figuring, can I go to Mike and ask him for work? We had become friends, and I remember how difficult it was when I was an editor, and people that I loved and respected were, had to come to me looking for work. And it was like, you never didn't want to give them work, but there were times where, like, even if you really felt like you believed in them, they weren't necessarily right for the things that you're working on as an editor. So, finally my wife is like, you know what, just ask him. If he can't do anything, he will say, he can't do anything, So I was like, all right, I presented this stuff to Mike, and, he had some feedback, and he's like, ultimately what he came back with was, we don't really have anything for you to draw right now, but what you might be able to help out with is, we're going to be changing writers on G.I. Joe. We need someone to fill in till we find the right person, they wanted, Joe Casey was leaving, and they wanted to find someone of equal, visibility and reputation to take over the book, So I said, sure, I'll do. I knew it would be fun to work with Mike and, his encyclopedic knowledge of G.I. Joe. And I just knew it would be fun. It was like a limited thing. I wasn't going to be overwhelmed with it. I was like, all right, I'll do this. And, one thing led to another. I ended up continuing to do it. But the way it started was my whole intention was I was going to try to get, art assignments, not writing assignments. I had never even considered writing, really, except maybe as if I would need something to draw. It was never something that I wanted to do. Even when I was little, I wanted to draw comics. I didn't want to write them,
So we can just place this in time, and then Mark, you can lead us back. The first issue of G.I. Joe America's Elite that you write is issue 2021, which is cover dated April 2007. And just to clarify for our listeners, there are two Marks in this episode. There's Mark the host. There's Mark the host, Talking Joe Mark, and there's Mark Powers, our guest. And when Mark Powers says Mike, he probably means Mike O'Sullivan,
yes,
editor at Devils Due. But there's also Mike Baer,
that's right,
who penciled almost all of Mark Powers' written
one
issues.
Of the most talented people ever
Of G.I. Joe America's Elite. So I think just now, every Mike you referred to was Mike O'Sullivan, editor at Devils Due. Okay, back to you, host Mark.
I was going to say, Mark, you were talking about drawing for Devils Due, and I just what we're talking about. Did you draw for Devils Due in the end? I think you might have supported on this one cover.
Right. It was just that. That was just that. Yes.
So this is the famous staff cover for the final issue of America's Elite, which I think is 36. Featuring Joe Colton saluting. And remind us which bit of this cover was it that you worked on?
I did Joe. I did you could tell because this is a weakness of my art is that I always use myself as the model. So he looks way too skinny, but yes, I did G.I. Joe himself there. And I think John Lowe inked it, maybe. I'm pretty sure Mike did all the background heads, Mike O'Sullivan.
Very good. There we go. So circling back, so you started out at Marvel as an intern, and you sort of rapidly rose through the ranks. You're good there a good few years, and working on some quite high profile comics there. I mentioned New X-Men with Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. What were the kind of the highlights there for you at Marvel?
Like I said, I mean, as someone who reveres, as a kid, obviously loved Marvel as a kid and all the characters, and to this day, I still, I love the characters and the company, and it's funny because I joke with my daughter. Anytime the summer comes and there's going to be a Marvel movie and there's a DC movie, even though I haven't worked there in like 20 years, I still feel like we're going to crush them. I still have this weird, company spirit, but yeah, I mean, it was amazing to work in the characters and all these different books. But like I said, I remember the high points of the people, getting to, to work with, I mean, all these people whose names I knew from the comics when I was a kid. I mean, I came in and my first job there after I was an intern I was Tom DeFalco's administrative assistant was a woman named Mary McFerrin, who also ran the intern program. I was her assistant, so I was the editor-in-chief's secretary's assistant. But obviously now I'm working with Tom a lot. I mean, he's tolerating me at least, but it was still, working with Tom and, Mary was great. But, I had worked as an intern. I had worked with, my first internship was in the mornings. I would be in Bob Harris's office, and in the afternoons, I would be in Ralph Macchio's office. So, these are relationships that, I continue to have. Obviously, when I started, I get to work with all the different editors, and obviously Bob meant a lot to me and is still a good friend. But Bob, and then after I moved, I got promoted to assistant editor. I worked with Terry Cavanaugh, who was an editor there, and just a phenomenal person, just a very aside from being a great editor, just an amazing person. And working with Terry in Terry's office, he had Marvel Comics Presents. So that was like, you're working on, it comes out twice a month. There's 4 stories in each issue. So it's like this, you're working with tons of different freelancers. So you mentioned Sam Keith, I worked with Sam a lot, I mean, you tends to be in any editorial office, you've got the editor who's sort of, probably working primarily with the writers, maybe with the artists too. But as far as like fielding calls and sort of chasing deadlines and things like that, a lot of times that falls to the assistant. So we had Sam in our office. Sam did all those covers, and he did some of the stories too for Marvel Comics Presents. And Sam was like just a total character. I would be on the phone with him for like an hour every day. Just like BSing, because Sam liked to be on the phone, like while he was drawing, and there was Sam Keith, and then the opposite end of the spectrum was Alan Davis, who was doing Excalibur at the time, and he and Terry were super close, and but to me, Alan Davis is a giant, so I'm this assistant editor, and I get to be also in contact with Alan Davis, who's just like amazing. And there is so many people like that, but in the office, I mean, obviously I mentioned Bob and Terry, I got to, I had really close friends there at the time, like James Felder, who, I think maybe people don't know his name that much, but he had a lot to do with like helping some really big names become what they would eventually become in comics. And, is a phenomenal writer himself, I mean, there's just too many people to mention, but that's really what I go back to, is the people,
Mark, the Bill Jemas, Joe Quesada era of Marvel, bringing it out of bankruptcy in 99 and 2000.
Yeah.
There was a lot of experimentation for a couple of years, and Marvel was sort of the like plucky, smaller of the fighters. Can you talk about sort of that feeling, but also this? You sort of referred to it earlier. This long-standing feeling that like Marvel was this sort of we're all in this together. Like you're a Marvel fan that I think had come a lot from Stan Lee in the 60s. So can you describe the character of Marvel when you were there and sort of how that affected your editing and your office?
Yeah, I mean, well, as far as Joe and Bill, I mean, I think that you know that whole experimentation thing fit in, very much with the history of the place, and a lot of the success, the things that became really the bedrock of the company, like Fantastic Four or Avengers and Chris's version of the X-Men, really was born of experimenting, of like having being at a point in time in the company's history where they weren't sure what they were going to do next or how they were going to keep this success or that success going. And you had that obviously incredible period in the early 60s where it's just Stan and Jack and Steve Ditko just like just cranking out all these ideas, just so many ideas. And then obviously Chris totally taking what was always there, this strong German of concept for X-Men, and making it something huge. And then, I think that when Bill and Joe came along, they fit in with that. I kind of wish that, I had been in a better mindset, that I could have enjoyed that more, but I was so burned out by the time that came, that I don't feel like I did. But I feel like it's all kind of a piece, and it was, as far as them coming in was kind of, I think in retrospect, what was needed at that time, I can definitely say Joe is one of my favorite artists of all time. Just taking everything else away, he's one of my favorite artists. But as far as like how it affects, how you approach the job as an editor, I would go back to, you guys might have heard that Mark Grunwald he was our executive editor. He was like sort of one step below Tom DeFalco. He used to do and have an assistant editor's class every week that all the assistants had to go to, and it was essentially a writing and editing class. And it was all about the standards of what constitutes a good story, and balancing what makes a good story in one issue versus having to continue that story essentially forever. And hiring the right freelancers and maintaining schedules and everything that goes into the job. That's really what shaped me as an editor, is that Mark's classes, and I would say also the personalities of the people you work for when you first start, when you're young. When I was young, my first boss as an editor was Terry, and I wanted to be like Terry. I wanted to be like Bob. Bob had been my boss as an intern, and he and Terry were actually really good friends. So these are people that I wanted to be like. And then I got to work with Danny Fingeroth in the the Spider-Man office. And, he had an impact on me as well. So, I think as a young person, it's natural that, the things that sort of shape how you approach a job in a large part comes from the people that you work for and the people you look up to. There was definitely, a way of doing things that was common to everyone, but every person along the editorial row had their own takes on how to go about that,
And where you ended up in Marvel was as the senior editor. Was that looking after the X-Men family of titles in that last role?
Yeah.
So, quite a lot of titles there, and you sort of hinted at I think you might have mentioned the word burnout.
Mhm.
Is that the story as to your career at Marvel ending and moving across to Devils Due? Was it for
To some degree. I mean, it was really just well, first of all, to be honest, I was laid off, so it wasn't, would I ever have had the you know the strength of character to just make my own decision and leave? I don't know, maybe after a longer time, but I'd already been there a few years, or feeling like, how can I get up in the morning? It really was nothing to do with the company itself so much as like things that were happening in the industry. It was for a while. Obviously the whole bankruptcy thing, really, just like it was. I look back on it sometimes and I'm like, I don't know how we all made it through that. Which is not to make it sound melodramatic. Like it's, obviously, we weren't. No one was like physically harming us, but it was this situation where every year there was these rounds of layoffs. So you kind of had this circle of fire getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and having to see people get let go that that I really respected and I loved them, and never expected to be working on Marvel at a time where I'm not going to get to see them every day. Even if they weren't close friends, they were part of the fabric of what made the company to me. So when I talk about burnout, that's really where it came from, is that it was a very tough thing to be a part of. And, there's, I felt guilty for being there when other people were getting let go. And that really sort of reached its, high point or low point, however you want to look at it. When my friend Jason Liebig, who was also an X-Men editor, and he had been my assistant, we were good friends, he got let go, and then Bob got let go. And I'm like, internally I'm thinking like, these guys are the people I look up to, like that I want, how can I still be here when they're not here? So I was kind of angry at myself, and, it really was not so much anyone external to me. It was just me. And then I think eventually, it was clear. I'm sure it was clear to other people aside from Joe and Bill that like, this guy he's not bringing it all, 100% every day. And if you're not bringing it in any job, if you're not doing it 100% every day, you're not doing it at all, and especially in a situation where you've got new management coming in, and they need, in order to have a chance to succeed, they need everyone rowing in the same direction. Not only that, but rowing with the same level of enthusiasm. That's really it, So, at that point, again, I don't have no idea what their thought process, but I'm sure that Joe is like, look, we have to make a change here. And, so, they laid me off, and I didn't really expect that I was going to ever do comics again. I mean, it was, obviously something I loved. I was kind of worried that I couldn't do anything else. And I forget who put me in touch. It might have been Mike Martz. I for some reason, I think Mike Martz, who is also an editor at Marvel, and a good friend of mine, I feel like he is the one who might have put me in touch with Josh, like in early 2004 or late 2003. We just started talking at that point. Josh, obviously had huge success with G.I. Joe. But Josh's thing was always, from the very start, he wanted to, he knew the long-term health of the company was going to come from owning IP and being able to exploit the IP for themselves, rather than having to be dependent on Hasbro or any other licensor. And he was starting this new line of comics called Aftermath, which is essentially superheroes. And so it was 4 new books, and they already had all the G.I. Joe stuff. So they really needed someone to come in and act as an editor, because everyone else already had their own rules. You had, Josh was the president, he was also writing things, and obviously had a huge amount of responsibility. And you had Tim there, who was not only an art director, but was a penciler and was writing his own book, Hack Slash. And Mike Norton, who was also drawing a whole bunch of stuff and was the art director. So they really needed someone to come in and actually just be an editor and just do that, you know. And that's basically how that happened. Is I came in and you know, for a few years, well, not for a few years, more like a year, I was the senior editor there.
But in 2004, the comics industry is in a different place, starting to be in a very different place than it had been in 2001, 2002, right? And the Aftermath line doesn't stick around.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that was always going to be a tough sell. And it's funny because I remember in the early, you know, when I was talking to Josh, he confided that he had spoken to, I'm not going to say the writer's name, but he was a big name writer who he had tried to get as one of the people who would come in and write one of those books. And the person had told him, like, I don't think you should do this, you know. You know, and it was nothing against the ideas. They were these concepts were all Josh's concepts. It wasn't so much as ideas. It was more like, don't do 4 of these at once. That's crazy. You know, the whole line of books is give people do one, and then, you know, and then if it's successful, then you could build on that. But Josh had already had this initiative going, so. You know, I still think those books were pretty good, you know, I mean, to varying degrees. But, you know, you were right, you know, they just didn't catch on. And unfortunately, they only lasted like 6 issues each. And, you know, that's it. And then you kind of, because those didn't work, you know, when you become more highly dependent on the licensed stuff with Hasbro. So, you know, I always knew, like, and I remember not having a great feeling about them. Like, man, if they decide they want to go elsewhere, we are so screwed, you know. And unfortunately, that's what happened.
Yes, the sort of the eggs all in one basket kind of scenario. That if that goes away, then you're in
and obviously there was other things. The economy was really bad. Now you're getting into like 2008 when you know, and I know that Josh had, you know, there were things going on that had it not been for the financial situation in the country at that time, things might have been different even without Hasbro, you know. But certain things fell through, and you know, then without Hasbro, it became, you know, just became very untenable.
Wait, let's before we get to 2008, post Mark, pull us back a few years.
So we're back at the beginning of the Devils Due era. Mark Powers is upping sticks and moving to Chicago to be the Devils Due editor, and significantly for us, you know, being the editor on the G.I. Joe titles. How was that initial experience? You're coming in towards the back end of that first volume that was being worked on, and they're diversifying in terms of, you know, putting out a few mini series around this time as well, like Snake Eyes Declassified and Master and Apprentice, and so how was that experience of getting up to speed and sort of hitting the ground running? Yeah, I mean, editing G.I. Joe.
It was fun. It was a little bit weird for me just because I was always used to being like one of the younger people in the company, you know, having other people to look up to, like I mentioned earlier, you know. So when I came in, I'm by far the oldest person there, and I was only like in my mid 30s at this point. So that was a little weird, you know, especially I would remember when I was first started working there, you know, everyone there was very nice, very nice. I remember Mike Norton was like, you know, once I sent you samples at Marvel and you never answered me. So, and I was, you know, of course I didn't remember. I might not have never have seen them, but, you know, it's like weird. It's, you know, just odd to have someone who's like, you know, an authority figure there, who's like, oh yeah, I want to, you know, he was probably, you know, who knows how much earlier that was, but, you know, he was really young at that point, and but yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was fun to get to know people who I was not familiar with for the most part, but who were amazingly talented. I mean, I knew then they were talented, but now you look back and you're like, I mean, just a murderer's row. And, I mentioned Tim and Mike, and you also had Sean Dove, and, even Sam, who wasn't necessarily writing or drawing anything, was like a super creative guy, and obviously Josh, Susan Bishop, who is our marketing advertising person, just everyone there was very talented. It was a lot of fun to be there in the office. It was a really small, intimate, atmosphere, as opposed to what I had been at Marvel, where it was like a giant company. And yes, you had the editorial staff who were all fairly small in the grand scheme of things, grand scheme of the company, but still a lot bigger than what Devils Due was. So it was a lot of fun. I was not familiar at all with G.I. Joe, as I mentioned earlier. I had never read it at all, not a single issue. Not even the famous silent issue, which didn't even require any reading. So, I had to do a lot, cram back issues and just sort of, jump right in. I was lucky to work with Brandon. You mentioned Master and Apprentice, and really that's, for whatever reason, that was the book that really made things click with me about G.I. Joe and what it was all about and what the appeal was. And, but yeah, I have great memories of that time.
Mark, can you talk about working with Hasbro and or going to Hasbro?
I was never at Hasbro. I never went. That's tended to be more Josh's thing if there ever had to be face-to-face meetings. So as far as working with Hasbro, my only real experience, editorially, we'd have to submit every issue to them so that they could, make sure it aligned with what they wanted for the property. And it was, there's no big problems during my time when I was an editor, because it was still during the period where we had the license and there wasn't really a question of like, oh, maybe these guys wanted the license, also I'm not sure that things had reached a point at Hasbro where they maybe started having to think like, we want to do other things with these properties, i.e. movies, video games, whatever, that might have influenced how they looked at the comic books. So for me, it was all pretty straightforward. I don't remember any big like, oh, you can't do this. You want to do this, but you can't do it. That stuff came later when I was writing the book, and Mike had to deal with that stuff.
But when you were editing, was this a weekly process of phone call, email, fax? Because
you're shaking
your head no. Because
I remember. Yeah, I don't think I ever spoke to anyone there. It was more like you had to submit the comics.
When you say comics, you mean the script and the pencils?
I mean, we probably had to do that. I don't remember, to be honest. We definitely had to submit like the lettered book before we could do anything with it.
Okay.
They had to see it, all with all the lettering, the story, everything there. And they had to sign off on it before we could then go to press. So, but like I said, I don't remember any big confrontations or disagreements. Certainly, even if there had been, even if it frustrated me, I mean, I get from having been on the other side of the desk that sometimes, someone creatively wants to do something and you have to look at the long-term, well-being of the property. And sometimes are not in complete agreement. So, I don't remember any big problems as far as that goes.
Do you remember as editor keeping the book on schedule with pencilers, with inkers, with fill-in artists, or making up a schedule, and also juggling those spin-offs?
Yeah, I mean, it was it was never. On the one hand, I want to say it wasn't easy, because it never is. But I was also fortunate that Tim was our main artist during that time, and he was very fast. So that right there makes things more doable than it might otherwise have been. He's also, Tim also has a ton of ideas himself. So even when you might be stuck on something, Tim is the kind of guy who could easily come in and be like, oh, how about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and certainly probably one of those things will work out, But yeah, it was definitely a struggle. There's also an adjustment period too. Although I think, certainly compared to what things are now, the rates they were paying were, they might have less than Marvel, but not horribly less than Marvel or DC. But it's different when you're used to working on the X-Men and paying Marvel rates. Like, hey, you want to do this? Yeah, I give you the top rate of the company right now if you want to do this. I couldn't do that at Devils Due. So there was definitely the need to, find different artists, new artists, that was definitely an adjustment. That was definitely, and also, I was not even though it was my job to be, I was not amazing with deadlines. Somehow I always ended up, crunched up against it. That was true at Marvel too, unfortunately. It's funny because I remember Josh, there was some interview he gave at one of these online comic book websites when I was first hired, and he was like, yeah, Mark is he's a veteran, he's gonna come in, he's gonna crack the whip on. I'm like thinking like, he doesn't know me too well yet, I've never cracked the whip on anyone, so.
Yeah, I sort of this is a bit of a deviation now, and I don't want to sort of trigger any sort of emotional trauma here, but it sort of, you talking about the deadlines does make me think a little bit about that new X-Men era with Frank Quitely, whose art is amazing, but obviously slower, and some of those fill-ins from other artists where issue to issue there was a little bit of a difference between what you might expect.
Yeah, it was frustrating, but it was I'm trying to think. It was definitely chaotic. I remember feeling kind of like stuck on that, only because I felt like how much leeway do I have to like pull things away, and there was also a situation where before those guys came in, I finally had the situation where I felt like, okay, we got some stability here with the whole schedule situation. So I basically had 3 artists rotating across 2 books. I had Adam Kubert, I had Salvador LaRocca, and Tom Rainey on the 2 X-Men books. So basically, I felt like I finally got a situation where it's not like this insanity, and really should have been like that long time ago. But in any case, I felt like, okay, and it was Laniel was on the X-Men too. How could I forget him? But in any case, we had this great situation. We had a rotating team of artists, and we didn't ever have to get into a situation where it's like, okay, I got to call someone who, just because I know they're super fast, and even though I know I'm putting them in a situation where they can't do their best work, you have to get the book out, because I definitely had too many situations like that. But so when Grant and the rest of them came in, Grant didn't like, I'm going to say he didn't like, but didn't feel like Tom and Salva were the best fit for his stories. I remember he had at least at one point mentioned he liked Igor's work. Igor Corday is the guy I think you're thinking of, and Igor happened to be very fast, but his style was so different from Frank's that, like, when you had one issue come out and the next one, I could totally understand as a reader, you might be disappointed, or just feel like it's very jarring, So yeah, that was not ideal. But
I just want to say, as a longtime X-Men fan, people are sometimes grumpy about those Igor Corday issues of New X-Men. his Cable and Soldier X are some of the most interesting things Marvel did that whole decade. And wasn't he hired to do an issue of New X-Men, and then maybe it was you. Someone was like, "Okay, now can you do the issue before it?" It's like, oh my gosh,
that is possible. That is possible. He did that. There was something like that, but I don't remember it specifically.
But some very harsh deadlines.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he probably, there's at least one of those issues he probably just did in 2 weeks. Which is insane for someone who's both penciling and inking.
And also drawing Cable.
Yes, I'm doing
at the same time.
And penciling and inking Cable.
Wow.
So, it was very crazy,
All right, back to
G.I. Joe. Now we return to G.I. Joe.
Now back to G.I. Joe.
Yeah, I didn't get the sense that maybe I think the transition between artists during your period at G.I. Joe was had that same dynamic, because there was a pretty stable on the main book. It was for the most part Brandon Jerwa and Tim Seeley for that back end of that initial volume, but I think you then oversaw that transition into the America's Elite era with Joe Casey and Stefano Caselli. So
can I ask a question before we get to that, or that's maybe part of this question, which is at what point in the run before America's Elite did you start to think, or did Josh say, how do we goose sales? We're losing eyeballs, because that's the standard attrition. An editor is thinking of that every month to some degree. So what were you going to do? When did you all start talking about that?
Pretty early on. I remember even when I had first started there, one of the first things I spoke to Brandon about, that I pitched him, was a version of World War III. It was like, because my biggest thing that when I was talking, remember I was joking earlier about my assistant at Marvel and the other guys that were roughly in that age range of how much they were into G.I. Joe, and I'd always say to them, like, they fight the same guys every month. How can that work? I mean, how is that? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Now later, of course, I got it, but that still was like, early on was like, why don't we just have them win? Why can't we just do something where they win, and then the whole story is flipped. And, I don't even remember how this sort of unfolded. I remember Brandon was like, that's intriguing, but I don't know how. I forget exactly how things went, but I think we kind of maybe had it in our heads that we'd do something like that eventually. And I think that part of I'm trying to think of how all this unfolded. I can't quite remember if the whole Red Shadows thing was the attempt at doing spiking sales, or if that was always intended to be something that led to the end of the book, but yeah, it was definitely a concern almost from the start, because by that point the sales, maybe they weren't terrible, but they were already going down, because that first bonanza of years worth of stories, 2001 to 2002 or whatever, that wasn't sustainable. It was, I hate to say that it was a fad, but it kind of was. You had to find a way to sort of stabilize the sales a bit, but, within an acceptable range,
What are the things, besides these things, to get more sales, right? So new writer, new artist, start over at issue number 1.
Yep.
New title, retitle the book.
Yep.
And new
zero issue.
Zero issue. That's low priced. That's almost free. Like a new focus. Some kind of like sales incentive for stores or a contest. Is there anything I'm missing? Like, what are the tricks in your bag that you might use what are the tools in your toolkit to get a lot of new readers or readers back?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I mentioned before with with Kubert winning, that would be my main thing. Is like you want to have it come from story. Ideally, you want the excitement to come from story, because then everything else is like, yes, we can do a number one issue, but that's so artificial. The sales are going to plummet after that. Yes, you could bring in a new writer, but and we did eventually do that, but no, it's not like any of us were sitting around thinking like, man, Brandon is just. Man, he's sandbagging this book. I mean, no one thought that. He did great work on the book. It was just the situation in the industry, the marketplace. We did eventually, feel like we had to make a change. Joe Casey. The reason why we settled on him is because, well, first of all, there's already a relationship between him and the company, and out of all the Aftermath books. Everyone there, from me, Josh, everyone, we all agreed Joe's was the best. He's the one who really came in and sales success or not success aside, who came in and really like put his everything into it. I remember when his scripts would come in, we all wanted to read them. So we said, if we're going to do this, and we're gonna try to get a writer who's got a bigger name. Joe is a big name writer, and he's already got a relationship. We all like his work, so we're going to see if he can do this. And Stefano had done Master Apprentice and Hack Slash, and everyone within the office, we all felt like he was, a guy who was kind of homegrown and could be a star, so that's why they were put together on that book. And you also had Sundaraj, who was the colorist, and really brought his own talents to the table. I would never call a colorist just a colorist, but Sundar was more than a colorist. He very much was Stefano's creative partner, and we felt like that would give the book a unique look. So stuff like that. If you're gonna make a change, you want it to be something that where the excitement comes from what you're putting out, rather than what number is on the issue and what kind of sales incentives. Those things are tools to help you get something you think is good in front of people, and hopefully that good thing will keep them coming back.
Yeah, excellent. You're spot on. And in terms of talking about colorists as well, one thing that we definitely picked up on was that later in that run, when Jean-Francois Belliot joined the book, coloring over the top of there we go, over the top of Mike Baer's work. It's really sort of really key part of that partnership and that creative, overall creative package, where writing, line work and color all comes together to make the perfect package, really. So yeah, I think color often falls into the background, but when it's working at its best, it's a true part of the overall partnership. So you saw through like the America's Elite sort of launch and the first few issues of that, and then you moved on from Devils Due. Do you want to, before being brought back by Mike O'Sullivan as a writer, can you talk about that bit of your journey?
Yeah, so even when we were putting together America's Elite and making that change, I think I'd already told Josh that I was leaving. So my wife and I had our first daughter, and she was born in March 2004, so she was a baby when we moved out there, and it was tough to be away from our families when we had a little baby like that. Her parents were coming out to see us a lot, and I kind of in early 2005, my aunt, who I'd been super close to and really, I probably never would have done anything in comics if it wasn't for her. She passed away. So we kind of had this feeling if we wanted to be back closer to family. So, and I could also see at that point that the whole Josh's hopes with Aftermath and all that stuff, that would, help the company really expand, and that was not going to happen, so I told him that we were going to move back. Mike was going to take over. That seemed like the natural thing. And then we did. I moved back, and I still did some freelance editing for them, I think, on like the Dungeons and Dragons stuff. And that was my way of sort of keeping at least some kind of connection to comics and Devils Due. And then maybe a year after I left, I sort of I had pitched drafted when I was still on staff, but not for me to write. That was just something, again, that going back to Josh's desire to have a company-owned IPs, I had pitched this concept thinking like, okay, someone do something with it, and it was something that Josh and I both really liked, and it just kind of fell by the wayside for a while. But then I started thinking about it like, well, maybe I could do something with this, So I had reached out to Josh and I said, do you mind if I try to do something with this? And he was like, I was going to ask you, why don't you do it for us? So I had actually already started working on that a bit when the G.I. Joe thing came up. So, that's how kind of, we're getting to like 2005, 2006 era, I think. Because I was working on those two things simultaneously, that I remember.
Mark, is there ever going to be a drafted movie?
Well, my wife is certainly totally dead set on this and was getting mad at me last night when I was trying to explain to her that the latest group of people who have been involved in that, the whole, half of Hollywood's burned down. She's like, what's going on with this? I'm like, nothing's going to happen right now. It's like, I've always tried to explain to her, like, when you get frustrated and you're asking me what's happening, like you're asking me why we haven't won the lottery yet. That's what you're asking, because lots of people option stuff all the time. Comics, books, like it gets options, they got to get their ideas from somewhere, but hopefully someday something happens. But like I said, that's like, it's like winning the lottery. You just have to get very, 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 very lucky.
What was there? You can be vague. Was there a long process of drafted being optioned many years ago?
And
option lapsing.
It's never really,
and it returns, and then someone else options
a bunch of times. It's been with multiple people. Always, very excited to be involved in it, and. I'm not like Stephen King or someone like that where they're like pre-sells itself. They have to get someone to actually read it and like, okay, the right screenwriter to come in and say, yeah, I can do something with this, and then get the right director who thinks, oh yeah, I can do something with this screenwriter on this thing. Then we're going to take that package and go to the studio and they'll greenlight it.
Because someone has to put up the money.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. And you look at, it's funny, I was thinking about that again. My wife really genuinely was asking me about this last night, and I was thinking like how long it took Criminal to finally get greenlit and into an actual TV show, and that is something done by these guys who are giants of the industry who are freaking amazing, and that took forever, And compared to that, like I'm not trying to diminish myself, but I'm not Ed Brubaker or Sean Phillips, so you got to get lucky. So maybe there'll be something someday, but probably not if we're being honest.
Well, Chris Lee is increasingly a big deal in Hollywood, right? So maybe he knows a man.
There's these things come up, like the guy who drew the comic actually has his own, concept art studio now. So you've got a perfect in case you want to have some visuals created for whatever pitches you're doing. So, but
okay, with that excursion into 20 years and also 2025, host Mark, I'll hand the mic back to you because I bet you have a question back in our chronology.
Yeah, so we were talking about really about you getting started with writing G.I. Joe. So you'd been working on drafted probably first, and then that that sort of followed on into writing G.I. Joe, and I think Mike O'Sullivan has told us, that he really that your relationship between you two really worked, and when he was seeing that vacancy that Joe Casey was wanting to move on, that your name was on the top of the list, and it sounded like a very collaborative relationship.
Yeah,
I guess
for sure.
with both of you being both having a sort of editorial background. I think the question, there's probably two questions there. So what how does writing compare to editing, and is writing something that was always in the back of your mind that you wanted to move into that direction in your career?
No.
Okay.
Like I said, I if I ever always had thought if I write anything, it would only be so I have something to draw. As a matter of fact, I mentioned Mark Grunwald earlier. Shortly before he very prematurely passed away. He had tried to get. I forget what it's called, Solo Avengers or something like that. There was a book where. It was basically spotlighted Avengers every issue, a certain Avenger every issue, and he asked me if I would write an issue, or maybe it wasn't Avengers, maybe it was some different characters' origin got told, I forget. But in any case, he asked me to write an issue, and I told him, like, Mark, I'm not interested in that. I was very much had it in my head that, there was definitely a thing at that time where there was concern of like editors writing comics, and I did not want to be anyone to think that that's what I wanted, because it was becoming something that other people outside the company were paying attention to, and like it was not it's one thing if you're Mark Grunwald or Tom DeFalco, who already have all these skins on the wall as writers and are proven commodities, but I'm just some junior editor. Like, I just did not want anyone to think that's what my reason for being here is, that I'm going to edit books and that's it. And Mark had said to me, like, I really think it would help you as an editor to do this. It would give you like a perspective that you don't have right now. And I was just like, I was kind of hemming and hawing, and then he, like, I don't even know if the conversation really truly came to a head. And before any of us knew it, he had unfortunately passed away, and I never thought about it again until the G.I. Joe thing came up, until Drafted came up. But I can say that he was right. Had I done that, I'm sure it would have affected how I approach things as an editor, and you think, like, how stupid can you be that you couldn't be able to put yourself in that chair? How stupid. It's just obvious. You're doing it for years, month after month, being friends with people who are writers. But I can tell you, it does make a difference. And I wish I had done that far earlier, because it does give you a different perspective. And I was fortunate that I had Mike, because we had a very close relationship. And even those times where I might have wanted to do something that either wasn't right or he didn't feel it was right at the time, it just came naturally as two friends talking, that he could knock it down and say, well, not that, but how about this, but I really do wish that I had done that earlier, because it would have definitely helped me as an editor. Definitely.
One of the most successful writer of G.I. Joe, Larry Hama, is obviously, he came from an art and editorial background first, before moving into writing. Do you think there's anything specific about G.I. Joe that having that kind of mindsets or backgrounds would be particularly helpful?
Not necessarily. I mean, maybe from the perspective that it's a huge cast, and you have to have a sense of how to balance all that, not only as a writer, but as an artist, but I'm not sure that really applies all that much more than it does with other comics. I would say it definitely, I think Larry has a role. It very much is Larry's baby, he's, Larry's a legend, and when I started working on the book as a writer, I was like, God, this is so easy. It was never felt difficult. And a lot of that was, yeah, I had Mike there, but it was also like everything that Larry set up. It was just all the personalities, the conflicts, the internal conflicts, everything was there. You know, it was very, very easy to work on, you know.
Since we're on this other writer of G.I. Joe, for just a moment, when you were the X-Men group editor, you were not the specific series editor of Wolverine, right?
Yeah, I was.
You were, okay.
Yeah.
So you were interacting with Hama because he was writing the book. Which is perhaps a thread if I was to do this episode all over again. Is there anything worth explaining there? Because what you were just saying about him setting up sort of the
no, I mean, if I could go back in time, I would definitely try to pick Larry's brain more. You know, I mean, it was he definitely always had the mindset of like, I don't know how the story is gonna start when I sit down to write it. I mean, I don't know how it's gonna end.
Right.
And you know, as an editor, that's frustrating. But I really wish I would have sat down and be like, obviously he's someone who's had tremendous success, and that way of working has worked for him. So I really wish I would have gotten his head and said like, okay, how does it work then? Like, tell me what you're experiencing as you write an issue. Like, you know, I remember there would be times where I'd be like, you know, like I did, like he could tell I was frustrated. Like, he'd be like, Wolverine 75 was the one that everyone loved. That was the issue that everyone universally loved, myself included. I remember reading it and getting a lump in my throat. And he would say, when I wrote that issue, it was all in the script. I put all that in the script. I didn't plan that out. That's the way it wasn't, you know, it's like, and I really wish I would have taken that thread and be like, okay, Larry, tell me how you did that. Like, what can you walk me through it? Because I think it would have been helpful for me as an editor, but also as a writer later on, you know, because that's not me at all. I can't do that. I wish I could.
Was there one more Larry Hama question?
Sure.
We're talking about Wolverine 75. So were you
on that? I was not.
You weren't. Okay.
Yeah.
But so I don't know when you were directly editing
not until later.
off the okay, but to varying degrees. So 75 particularly, like Phalanx Covenant a little bit later. That kind of thing. Wolverine, you know, would come in and out as being, you know, very much part of the middle of the X-verse versus more of a solo story in its kind of own. In its own space. I wondered, and you might not have experienced this directly, what it would be like, what it was like to edit Larry with that wider universe, where what he's doing as he's making it up page to page, how that, and it needs to connect to a wider X universe, how that kind of worked.
I mean, it was fine. I mean, Larry, you know, I'm trying to think. Well, I started working on Wolverine. It was after issue 100. I know that. So it really wasn't that long with Larry. Maybe
he's only on it. He's only on it for a year and a half after 100.
So, but yeah, we did have a big storyline or two during that time, and you know, as long as you give him like, okay, this is what's going on, you know, he was fine. You know, I mean, Larry is great. He's like. You know, I know he has the whole shtick of like, you know, I've been faking it for 50 years. You know, I'm like, I guess maybe he's faking it, but he's just so good. You know,
I think there's faking it, which he is doing it. He's making it up as he's going along, and there's also really, really good instincts.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you have both of them, 100%. I think it looks to everyone else like he does know what he's doing.
Yeah.
Was there any difference in reading or editing one of his plots as compared to reading and editing plots or scripts from other X-Men writers? And I ask for two reasons. One, because he did start as an artist first, and two, because of this making it up as he goes along explanation.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree. I mean, there was, Larry had greater awareness of what would work on a page versus what wouldn't, and would also have frustrations when the artist didn't follow what he or make decisions that I think he felt like they should have made, or especially since he did go out of his way. I mean, he would go out of his way to try to make things easy for the artist, not just in how he wrote it, but Larry was famous in the office for always having like amazing reference. If you needed to draw a plane, he brought in a huge book with all the stickies in it of like, okay, here's the things you should look at. Here's the things you could Xerox and send to the artist. So I mean, if that stuff wasn't followed, it's like, why aren't you doing this? I'm trying to make it easy on you. And then shortly, I mean, I guess that was the era when it was started. People started to transition away from the plot, the Marvel method of plot, art, script, being separate. But Larry always did it that way. So,
can I ask a question? After Hama, Warren Ellis writes a 4-issue story, was it Not Dead Yet, that Lenil Yu draws.
Yep.
And was Hama formally off the book? Did he take a break?
Yeah.
Someone fired him or someone replaced him?
Yeah, we moved him over to Generation X, I think. Is that we've kind of, I'm trying to remember how all this went. I definitely think we all felt like, Larry's been on the book for a long time. Maybe we need something else different on here. But we didn't want to, he's Larry Hama. So we want to make sure that, okay, we're not going to just cut Larry loose. So we're going to how about maybe he could do on Generation X, which was another book we kind of felt like after Scott and Chris left, was kind of floundering a bit. So maybe Larry could take that book and run with it and do something interesting. But that was also during an era where it was very chaotic. It was like there was a lot of people coming and going editorially, shifting around, books having to get reassigned because people were leaving staff for one reason or the other. There's a lot of pressure internally for these books to, they're the only thing that's really selling, and you got to somehow keep it all going. It was very chaotic,
Cool. I've always wondered about that. All right, host Mark, back to you. Again, is a chronological question about G.I. Joe. We're in America's Elite.
We're at the beginning of America. We're coming up to issue 21 of America's Elite, the Sins of the Mothers story, and I think. As Mike tells it, and I think even as you tell it in interviews in the past, there was a very sort of collaborative, let's sort of think, not page to page, like some writers, but let's think about kind of what we were trying to accomplish over the broad sweep of the next year or so. Can you do you remember that that sort of collaborative process with Mike and sort of plotting out?
I mean, especially with the Baroness story. At least when we started it, we didn't think it was going to be anything more than those 4 issues. So we wanted to do something that you would get in, get out, and it's defined like, okay, this is what we're telling. She's, she was pregnant, she had the baby. Here's, we're picking up from something Mike, I think he had done in one of the books or the end of Joe's run, and then sort of partway through. Partway through is when they had said, well, maybe you could stay on the book, and it's at that point we started, layering in some stuff that we would use later on, like with the stuff with, where Cobra Commander was sort of maneuvering and trying to do these things that would give him more power, getting control of Mars and the stuff with Agent Delta at the very end, like that was all stuff that was definitely intended to feed into the next story arc that was going to be a lot bigger. But at least when we started, we thought it was just going to be a story focusing on the Baroness,
Yeah. I mean, for sure, it's the two storylines, sort of a bit of a compare and contrast to sort of a smaller character-focused arc, and then sort of opening up the world to a much bigger, ambitious story. So Oh, and here's a bit of trivia for you that you might not know. In the Sins of the Mother storyline, you introduced a name for the Baroness, Anastasia Sisinova. And that name has now, in the Skybound Energon universe continuity, become her canon name for her file card. So, any thoughts on how that name where that name came from?
Yeah,
Any recollection?
I think I think this Cisnerova, I think came from like Caesar. I remember doing like just Googling stuff of like names that might mean like royalty, blah, blah, blah. And somehow I hit on that. Because I think before they had called it like her name was Deco Bray or something like that. I was like,
yeah.
That stuff I was like, I just can't, her name is not Deco Bray and now she works at Cobra. Like it's got to be something else, that still kind of fits her character. So I think pretty sure it was something like that,
So then sort of following Sins of the Mother, it was a 12 issue World War III grand arc. And at some point during that arc, you found, you would have found out that Devils Due was losing the license and the series was having to come to an end. Are you able to talk about kind of planning out that arc and how perhaps you had to pivot once you found out that the title would have to come to an end at the 12 issues?
I mean, I think it became somewhat clear that it was probably going to happen, partway through, pretty early on, but there was still, for some reason, I think there was some scenario where Hasbro was not being crystal clear about what was going to happen or the timing of it, or maybe at some point first they were just going to pull the plug immediately. And Josh or Mike was able to prevail upon them like, you can't do that, but I think there was still like, we were trying to put stuff in that we thought it would appeal to them, like the whole thing with the plague, like Mike and I think maybe even Sam, I don't know if they were going to be action figures or something, but the plague was definitely put in because we felt like this is something Hasbro would like, and unfortunately, I remember we got to that one issue where you introduced them at the end, and I felt like that went really well, where you kind of, Cobra Commander says something like the whole bit about the Black Plague and it's purifying and blah, blah, blah. And I felt like that was a nice introduction. But the problem is then after that, you need the plague to actually do stuff that seems like really dangerous and more than what a normal team of Cobra guys could do. And they would never let us do that. So it just became like a bunch of issues of the G.I. Joe guys chasing around various plague people, and we try, I think we did a fairly decent job of keeping it entertaining, but they were never as badass as that one intro indicated they might be, there was definitely stuff like that where we had to be more wary than ever before about pissing off Hasbro because they were going to let us finish the storyline at least, which the company needed them to do. And, we weren't going to create big conflicts with them because they could be perfectly within their rights to be like, we're just stop right now, because I think those last bunch of issues might have been done without a contract in place. I think the contract might have already run out or something. It was a really weird situation. Yeah, it was, ultimately it was kind of, it was fun. It remained fun through the very end of it, but it was also kind of deflating because we knew the stuff that maybe could have come out of it, the stuff we could have done in that last third of the story or so could have been a lot better if the situation between the two companies wasn't what it was.
What are some things that would have happened in the final third of the story? What are some things that would have happened after?
we didn't have anything concrete that I can even say, oh, we would have done this or we would have done that. But I think that there would have been more lasting changes in the way that, maybe certain characters wouldn't be around anymore. Or, the one thing I do know, like, they never were happy that Lady J got killed. That was something that I remember Josh telling me, that they were never happy with that. So stuff like that was definitely a no-no. But, I think that we could have done something big, and then, even after the Joe's win at the end of the story and put everything more or less back into place, you still have a situation where for a time the world was run by a terrorist organization, so I mean, there's no way that wouldn't be chaotic even after the good guys win, and there'd be so much to play with there. And that, yeah, you've beaten Cobra Commander, but what about all the cells out there? Like, a lot of this came from it's very much of its time where people were worried about Al-Qaeda and stuff like that, and terrorist cells and things like that. And, I did a lot of reading of like how these things worked. Like, they're not in contact with each other. That's the whole point. That's part of what makes them dangerous. They're not like taking orders from someone in Kabul. It's like they're operating on their own. So that would be what it was like after, they took down Cobra Commander. Well, now he's a martyr, and you've got all these cells out there doing this or that, and maybe they're even in conflict with each other, which would bring a level of interest, because then you've got on the one hand, it kind of fits in with the overall history of G.I. Joe and Cobra, where the Cobras don't always get along with each other and often at odds within their own group. So you got that, but you also got it in, I think, a more realistic trappings, and more modern, and there would have been a lot of possibilities for different stories. But what are you going to do? They had to do what they had to do.
One of the things that I heard described about that final run was that I think a few people at Devils Due were trying to push for a death of Cobra Commander, I think it was, as one of the conclusions and big finales. And despite it being the last issue and the end of that continuity, I think Hasbro vetoed that as not being.
I don't remember that. I mean, I definitely would not have been in favor of killing Cobra Commander. Just because I don't think if that could really go anywhere. The thing I had in my head, I remember at the time, I don't even remember if we even talked about it, is be like, oh, you got Cobra Commander? How do you know that's Cobra Commander? How do you know? Like, and so I mean, and I'm not saying that to be funny. It's like you could do something with that, It's possible that was brought up. I don't remember it specifically. Definitely, I wouldn't even, I would have known enough not to even mention that, even if I wanted to do it, because that would be like, oh yeah, why don't we kill Magneto? Oh, okay.
Again.
No.
But a couple characters do exit permanently. Alexander, Destro's son, who dates back to the first Devils Due Joe comic. And what's his partner's name? Host Mark? Armada? Lady Armada?
Armada, yeah.
They somewhere here.
Yeah, but Hasbro doesn't care about them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to get that on record.
Yeah.
Hasbro doesn't care about them.
But talking about Cobra Commander, I think I read an interview with you, sort of, where you were talking about sort of getting started on G.I. Joe, and one of the elements being to make Cobra Commander a much more serious threat.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the strengths of your work is that Cobra Commander does seem a lot more serious, a lot more scary than perhaps we've seen him elsewhere.
Yeah, I really liked what Paul Jenkins did with Cobra Commander when he did G.I. Joe Reloaded. And Paul, I don't think, didn't get to stay on very long, but I really liked, there was that first issue. I remember him, just the way he sort of positioned Cobra Commander, I thought was cool. And the whole thing with, the shiny helmet allows his people who follow him to see themselves in him. And I just liked him being very cognizant of the fact that he's, that this is all bullshit, but but in a cunning, scary way. Like someone, like imagine if Trump was like in total control of himself and had all that power and he was like, as people think like, oh, he's playing 11th dimensional chess. Well, we're lucky he's not playing 11th dimensional chess, because if he was, we'd be fucking screwed. That's like Cobra Commander. He really is. He knows what he's doing. Like he knows he's going to manipulate this person this way. He's going to manipulate this person that way. He sees 3 moves ahead. If I just do this, I'm going to get control of Mars, and then I've got all these weapons, and I can, So we definitely wanted, I remember, Tim did a cover like in the sort of one of it late in his run, where it's one of these things where Cobra Commander is like shaking his fists on and I'm like, why is Cobra Commander always doing that? Him and like the Red Skull are always like, I'm like, I want him to be like scarier, like
that one there maybe.
Yeah, I think it's that one. So
so Mark, you've done something which few people have done. You have written G.I. Joe comics. There's not that many people who have done that. You have written the longest G.I. Joe story that's a specific arc, because there are no other 12 chapter G.I. Joe stories, because at Marvel it wasn't structured like that, and at Devils Due it hadn't been structured like that. You've also done something that very, very few people have done, which is you have written a final issue of G.I. Joe. And you've also been an editor who has overseen the endings of some series. So can you talk in a general sense about what goes into creatively the final issue of a series, and maybe what goes into the final issue of a G.I. Joe series?
Well, when you're talking about a book like G.I. Joe, or really any book that is a big major franchise, first of all, you have to know it's not really going anywhere. It's like Devil's Due is not going to do G.I. Joe, but someone is. I mean, we didn't know who at that point, but we definitely knew someone would be doing it. So you want to focus on giving the readers who've been with the book up to that point like a really good send-off, something they'll be satisfied with and feel like, okay, I paid all this money for all these issues, and I feel like I'm picking up this last issue that has a special cover and it's the last issue that this company is going to publish. I'm glad I bought this issue. Like, I'm not just going to file it away, and put it in my collection because I bought every other issue. I'm glad I bought this because I really enjoyed it, and it's a good send off for this, this continuity or whatever. And that really would be true for any books I've worked on where it was quote unquote the last issue. Like the last. The last issues of X-Men before Grant took over, we knew obviously the book wasn't ending. It was going to become something very different, very in terms of vision, something very different. But we still wanted to make sure that the story that led up to that was something that was satisfying, and that's
Scott Lobdell is finally going to wrap up the legacy of Iris.
Yeah, well, the stuff like that, you kind of say Scott or Chris or whoever, Fabian, are like, oh, why didn't they ever do this? The fact is, the way those books were run was like, it wasn't necessarily their fault. It was like, there was always things getting tossed out, like, oh, that's cool. Do we know where we're going with it? No, we don't. We'll figure it out along the way.
I say that as a fan of the 4-part Eve of Destruction story.
Yeah.
And then can you talk about, so that's the creative end of G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the timeline of you writing the final issue at Devils Due? The final issue comes out, you're in Chicago, sort of what are you doing with Devils Due? When do you move? How does
we moved back in 2005. So we were back in New York through all this time, really, when I was writing the book.
Okay.
The only time I was in Chicago during the time I was writing it, I think maybe after Mike's asked if I would keep writing the book, we were still working on the Baroness story. I drove out there to visit them for a week or something, work in the office. But for the most part, I was back home in New York. So
after America's Elite 36 comes out,
mm-hmm.
And are you Are you getting out of comics? Are you doing
No,
a few
no, I
more
mean,
things for Devils Due?
yeah, I mean, I was this was unfortunately, yeah, this is where the whole economic downturn of the country really affected the company. Is that Josh had plans to do other things, like we weren't going to have the GI Joe license, but maybe we'd have some other licenses, and I was going to be on contracts exclusive to the company where I would write like, let's say, one licensed book a month and then one company owned book a month, where I'd have like some kind of participation in it if anything ever happened with it in terms of movies or video games or TV or whatever. That was going to be great because I would be guaranteed a paycheck every month. Wasn't going to get rich on it, but I could get to do this, and I really wanted to do my own stuff. That's really what I wanted to do. And unfortunately, that all fell through because whatever source of funding they had been courting and negotiating kind of fell through when the American economy collapsed. So I wasn't trying to get out of comics, but definitely my work in comics definitely was diminished at that point because for one thing, I am not. You might have noticed I'm not like super outgoing. I'm not one of these guys who's really has a skill at like, you have to be a self promoter to make it really an entertainment. You have to be not only be good at it, you have to embrace that part of it. And I'm just like, I can't do that. So I mean, I was happy to work with Devils Due. It wasn't like I was dying to work with other companies, and I remember at one point where when at the point, whatever point where G.I. Joe was doing really well, at least in terms of word of mouth when I was writing it, and I think we were at San Diego, and we were all kind of splitting up for the day, and we were like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, and Josh said, just don't go near Marvel, and like the implication there's they're going to try to steal me, and I'm like, that's never going to happen, but okay. But had I been a little bit more, a little bit more inclined to that part of the job of like trying to get more work, maybe I could have gotten it. But in any case, that stuff all kind of fell by the wayside. So really, since then, really, I think the stuff I've really done in comics, I've done, like you mentioned, a lot of Dresden Files stuff. I'm always happy to do that when it comes along. I've tried to once or twice get my own thing going, and it's never quite worked out. I give up too easy, but yeah, I mean, it is what it is.
Shall I come back with some G.I. Joe specific questions? So one of the things that we sort of appreciated from the what you did on World War III was the balance between a smaller cast and then sort of zooming back to the kind of the bigger world view. Like for example, there was an issue where we zoom in and we see Skullbuster versus Shipwreck and Covergirl, and I think that's Skullbuster inspiring a toy to be made of a very similar looking character. So you sort of really getting into the detail of characters that you in a story you care about. Well, this much more epic story is going along. How did you kind of approach that balance of the big and the small?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my experience working on the X-Men and being involved in those big storylines is that the only reason any reader is going to keep picking those up is like, yeah, they like all the big stuff, and when it's got the banner on the top of the issue that's like part whatever of whatever, yeah, they want to keep picking it up, but no one's going to love it unless you've got the character stuff that's going to keep them coming back, and you're putting the characters in situations that are not accustomed to and sort of using those situations to reveal who they are as people. That's really what keeps people coming back. That's what makes them care about the big stuff. Otherwise, it's like just, it's just a lot of people running around shooting each other. So yeah, we definitely wanted to make sure each issue, as much as we could, had some level of focus on, like you had an issue where it was really kind of focused on Duke and, his relationship with his father. And, we wanted to do a lot of that in the midst of all the big stuff so that you really emotionally had something to connect with as a reader.
Yeah, makes sense. And then sort of just balancing the giant cast of characters. I'm guessing the likes of Mike O'Sullivan and Sam Wells and co probably helped with that.
They would definitely, huge. Like, I don't know these characters. They'd be like, how about this guy and this guy and this guy are here, and then this guy and this guy are there. It's like definitely, the vast majority of those characters I would not have been able to pick out of a lineup. They knew all that stuff. Because
a lot of the the Easter eggs there, people sort of really enjoyed that and sort of created a whole sort of alternative universe in their own different fan fiction spin-offs and stuff. The likes of Action Force appearing in the book, for example, the British, the UK contingent of G.I. Joe that had never been seen in the American comics up to that point. So I guess probably only appearing in maybe 1-2 panels, I think, of the actual book itself, but people really are sort of embracing some of those. That's the thing.
If we had more space to play with, there is definitely, like you said, you could have made a story out of any of those things. You could have, because this was in theory happening all around the world. You could have done a whole story arc focused on the Action Force characters. We did sort of introduce these characters in Russia who were doing stuff, and if you read those books, you kind of do get the implication that like you're going to see more of them doing something, and that's one of those things where just kind of in the way things were unfolding at Hasbro and the way the story had to be structured just kind of fell by the wayside, and we didn't get to do as much with them as maybe we would have. But yeah, there's definitely stuff you could have done with any of these characters in any of these locales, and that could have been a story in itself.
I'm just gonna imagine the version of World War III where all 12 issues are double sized.
Yeah, we would have had to clone Mike Bair, and we should definitely mention, Mike. I'm talking about Bair now. He is so good, a lot of the stuff that I wanted to do as a writer only worked because I had Mike. He's in the hands of a lesser artist, I think that stuff kind of would have fallen flat in certain things. But he's so good with all the human stuff. Really with everything. But he, the stuff, the interpersonal stuff, he really sells it. The way the characters act and he's just so good. We were so lucky to have him for these issues, and I think we burned him out of comics forever on this. I think he's focused more on video games and animation and stuff now. And
but
we
spoke with him, and he does seem to be doing okay professionally in those other places.
For sure, yeah. There's another. I think this is part 1 of World War III. It was a sort of a great sort of start to the arc, and I'm forgetting my character names now. Is this one Arjun Seven? Tim, can you remember the name of this character?
Isn't that Cobra Mortal?
Cobra Mortal, thank you. Yeah, that's right.
Look at that. The self
It's such a weird name. That's what I remember. Like I think that character might have been my idea to put in there. Only because I was like I have some vague memory of trying to find someone who just looked cool, and who like no one would care that I wouldn't have to worry about like, oh, he's been in like 17 issues and he's got this relationship with that person. I'm like, he's just an action figure, not that we really did anything with him here, but it might have been my idea to use him. I'm not totally, I might be imagining that, but I remember it just being such an odd name, like Cobra Mortal. What does that even mean? Yeah,
it definitely meets the brief of a character that hasn't been used before, just looks really sort of striking from a visual perspective. You don't need to worry too much about the continuity, and fans are going to see him and just go, "Whoa, that's cool! Who is that guy?" And it was a cool action sequence from that particular issue.
Just looking at this page, I mean, look how much information Mike gets on in these panels, and it just looks effortless. It's so good. He probably looks at this and, it's horrible. It's so good. It's so amazing. I mean, he was just a kid when he did this stuff. He was probably like 22 or something. And it's amazing. I still look at this stuff all these years later, and I'm still blown away.
And also some really lovely understated color.
Yeah.
And the color, look, this does look like those colors. Like this does look like what you would see on an overcast, snowy day.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that beige, that green, that gray, that light gray. Like, no, you don't want more rendering than that. Or you don't want sort of brighter highlights than that. These are all choices.
Another fan favorite in the World War III storyline was the Red Shadows, who had originally been brought in towards the back end of the Brandon Jerwett era, but sort of as a version, as a kind of a new, essentially a new set of characters, and not trying to faithfully reuse the Red Shadows that had been in the UK comics. And they were brought into World War III, but I guess there wasn't necessarily enough room to do a huge amount of extra stuff with them in
but that's another example of some characters that definitely we would have come back to, because they were sort of introduced as an antagonist that was not Cobra, someone who was in conflict with both G.I. Joe and Cobra. Now maybe the story with them wasn't quite as successful in terms of like getting people really jazzed about them in that kind of role, but I still think there was a lot of potential there, that we could have come back to them, that they were brought in. We felt like we had, like, if they were really as big a threat or a presence within the G.I. Joe universe as we wanted them to be, they would have to be touched on in some way in this storyline, and then we could have come back to them later, in a different storyline. But they definitely would have been fun to play with.
Makes sense. And I had a specific question here from one of our listeners, Richard Straw, who asked, one of my who this is his favorite era of G.I. Joe. He's sort of an out and out World War III fan. His favorite comics from G.I. Joe ever. And he notes that one of his favorite things about your writing is the use of real places like Darfur, Chechnya, Israel, etc. And I guess that's in contrast to maybe the Harmer era, where he's making up countries like Wolf Gluckenland and Dark Clonia and that kind of thing. Was that a conscious choice to kind of base it more in real world place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely it just gives it a little bit more trappings of reality. If you want to position Cobra as like at least within the confines of essentially a superhero comic, a terrorist organization, you want it'll seem more real if they're operating in a world that is kind of our world, has the same countries and the same leaders and the same conflicts, that we're aware of in our own world. So yeah, that was definitely, it was definitely intentional. That was definitely the reason for it. Yeah.
I think I got to the end of most of my questions. We did, part of that world building. We did touch it. You did also check in on General Ray as well. So it was very much checking in on in those 12 issues across some of the key people and events from that continuity. Sort of not no character left behind. I did have one of my slides saved here, which was probably more for Mike O'Sullivan, because I think he's described this one as being a few late nights at the Devils Due office, pulling together a map of literally every single G.I. Joe character and placing where in the world they were. How useful was this kind of keeping track of things from the likes of Mike in terms of the story that you were telling?
Yeah, I mean, I saw this and I thought it was very cool. I don't know that I ever looked at it like, oh, forgot what this character was. Let me break out this map. I could just ask Mike if that was the case. But yeah, stuff like this is really cool. Him and I are both big fans of having like extras like this in comics. And Mike, he's in this, this is reflected in his role at Marvel now, but he's a huge fan of Marvel Universe, as am I. And, this very much harkens back to something you could have seen in Marvel Universe back in the day of like, okay, this is where all these G.I. Joes are stationed during this particular point in time. And it looks like a real map. I mean, it is a real map, obviously, but I mean, it looks like an actual military map. It's kind of cool.
Mark, when you say Marvel Universe, you mean the official handbook to the Marvel?
Yeah, official handbook. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very much playing to Mike's strength there, and his sort of next roles in Marvel after leaving at Devil's Duke, sort of very much in that playground. So yeah, I think I got to the end of the list of questions that I had. Tim, was there anything from you?
Are you reading comics these days, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, off and on, as I tell people sometimes when they ask. I have, I got the Marvel app a bunch of years ago, ostensibly because I would constantly see things advertised and I'd be like, wow, that seems really cool. I got to pick that up. The comics are so expensive that I'm like, all right, well, I'll get the Marvel app and then 6 months. Oh, I have to wait 6 months and then it's on the app and I get it for free for one price. Almost always invariably what I end up reading is the stuff from when I was 12, so it's not so much that I'm not interested, but I like I said, I have 2 kids. There's so much going on. I'm way behind on everything. If I could get any time at all to read, lately at least, I've been reading. There's some books I've been trying to catch up on, but yeah, I mean. I can't say I'm following anything super regularly. I mean, I'm trying to think I got this Black Canary book here that I got a few weeks ago. It's got amazing art and it's
the Ryan Sook miniseries.
Yeah, he's amazing. What else did I get here? Oh, of course, this is the main book I've been staying keeping on top of is the Gargoyle of Gotham. Raphael Grandpa book. Yeah, that guy's art is mind-blowing.
But you're holding the black and white edition of issue.
I only get the black and white edition because the coloring is good, but it obliterates his line work, and that's what I want to see.
And then for those of you listening, not watching, we did ask you at the beginning where you are, but I see you. You must be sitting in a chair in front of a wall. Behind you, I see some, I think some kid art of Harley Quinn.
Yes, that's old. My daughter, is an illustration major at FIT now, so that was done like probably a decade ago.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have 2 daughters. One is a junior in college, the other is a junior in high school, and that is a bunch of their stuff hanging behind me. So,
and speaking about keeping up with reading, did you? Since stopping writing G.I. Joe, did you ever sort of delve back in and see what people after you did with the property?
I mean, I didn't. I mean, it's like the fun of G.I. Joe was working with my friends. That's really what it was. I mean, not only Mike, but like I mentioned, there was Sam and it was Josh. I mean, Josh wasn't involved day to day with the storyline, but I mean, he's the guy who brought G.I. Joe back, and he and I are good friends, and we think very much alike, and just the way Mike and I think very much alike when it comes to story, and So GI Joe to me was an opportunity to work with my friends and people I love, and so it's not so much that I don't care about GI Joe or I have anything against any other company that's gotten it. I know it's like super popular again now, which makes me happy. But it's just not something, like I said, this stuff, I'm sure you guys know from your own wallets, all comics are really expensive now. So if I'm going to spend something, it's got to be special. It's got to be Raphael Grandpa, black and white artwork. So, but if I have friends who put stuff out, like Tim will put stuff out, and I'll try to pick up things that my friends have done, but I'm not like super regular anymore.
All right. So which is gonna get a movie first? Hack, Slash, or
Trash? Oh, definitely Hack, Slash. Definitely Hack, Slash.
Speaking of Tim Seeley.
Yes, definitely Hack. I can't believe no one's done that yet. It's just the concept is so strong. It's right there. It's so good.
But that's great. It says Mike O'Sullivan told us when we interviewed him that Hasbro, said to him, "What is GI Joe about?" And he said, and then he was told, GI Joe is about a group of friends having adventures. So very much borne out here in your experience.
No gun pointing.
No gun pointing.
Oh, it was just like right in the end of that last bunch of stories. That's when I think they started becoming putting a lot more scrutiny on this stuff. I'm sure because on the side, we didn't necessarily know any specifically, but I'm sure at that point is where they really started thinking like, okay, we can do something in movies and whatnot with these. We gotta keep it family friendly,
Are you talking about covers or covers and interiors?
Oh, covers and interiors. You can find places in World War II or World War III where there's characters that are going like this and there's no gun in their hands. There's like one panel where I think it's Duke and Agent Delta where they're having this confrontation, and Agent Delta like goes to him, and the way it's scripted, it kind of almost works that he almost looks like he's pointing at him, but he's not. He's supposed to have a gun in his hand, and they took it out. They made us take it out because we were not allowed to have characters in the same panel with one guy pointing a gun at the other. That's at the point where it's like, all right, we're going a bit far here, guys. I get your concerns, but it's a little nuts, They are Army guys, Yeah.
Very good. Mark, is there anything that you would like to plug or promote, point people towards before we wrap up?
No, I think I appreciate you guys having me. I wish Mike could have been here, but I really like meeting you guys. I listened to Mike's interview and Josh's interview, and those were both really cool. So I'll try to listen to the other stuff as well. It's
thanks for our listeners. There was an idea early on that Mike O'Sullivan was going to join us for this Mark Powers episode, but we have enjoyed having you all to ourselves. If not plugging anything, Mark Powers, are there places where people can find you on the internet, or do you stay off the internet?
No, I don't stay off the internet. I'm on Facebook, although I don't really post very often, almost never. Helping to overthrow democracy, to make it less of a appealing platform for me. Same goes for Twitter, even though I still do have a Twitter account. I'm mostly on Blue Sky now, but again, that amounts to me just like reading stuff and either liking it, like I'm not a big poster of my own. You might say I have no ideas of my own. I just like reading other people's stuff.
I think you have some ideas of your own.
Yeah, no, but I'm online, so I'm I'm not great at ensuring that I have a digital footprint like I probably should, but like I said, I'm on Facebook, and
editors and publishers can come to you.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, maybe if you get together, spend a week with Mike O'Sullivan plotting out your tweets for the next 12 months.
That's right.
You'll have
really
some
like
solid
that.
goals there. And it will be remembered 20 years on.
Yeah.
So that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us and being so generous with your time. It was great talking with you. We'll do our wrap up. If you are new to Talking Joe and you want to find us, we have a website. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website which points you in the direction of all of the places that we are across all of those platforms that are owned by billionaires. And Tim, where can people find you when you are not talking to me? Tim, where can you be found when you are not talking to people called Mark about G.I. Joe?
Video essays on television and film at my YouTube channel at Atomic Abe. I own a comic book store outside of Boston, Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe on my blog, realamericanbook.com.
Great stuff. So that is us done. But before we go, just remind us of something, Tim.
Nobody But Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters.